All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And welcome back for folks that's been tuning in all year. This month, we continue our webinar series with a look into our regional lens of restorative justice. And our topic is restorative justice in the Midwest. My name is Avery Arrington. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm one of the assistant directors at the National Center on Restorative Justice. I'm grateful to have you all tuning in today for our conversation as we're highlighting restorative work in the Midwestern region of the United States. As always, thank you to our host institution, Vermont Law and Graduate School, our additional grant partners at the University of San Diego and the University of Vermont, as well as our federal funding partners at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, part of the United States Office of Justice Programs, who continue to champion and support our center's restorative justice initiatives. Please visit us at ncorj.org for more information about our initiatives and commitment to restorative justice while trying to improve practice and policy within a criminal legal system. I will now turn things over to our moderator today, Carrie Landrum, a conflict resolution practitioner, a restorative justice facilitator, and a peace builder who has been facilitating restorative practices for nearly 2 decades. Thank you again, Carrie. She's representing Detroit, Michigan today. We're happy to have her. So I will now turn things over to you, and special thanks to our panelists as well.
Thank you so much, Avery. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really excited for the conversation we're about to have with this incredible panel we have today. And so I'd like to jump right into it and have all of our panelists share their voices in the room today. So I'd like to go around and do brief introductions. Each of our panelists will share name, your pronouns, the location you're tuning in from, the original stewards of the land you're tuning in from. And in order to ground us, since this is a series tied to restorative justice efforts in specific geographical locations, I'm going to ask everyone to share one highlight of the land around you that you'd like to lift up and celebrate, and that can help ground us. And of course, also share the context or the sectors in which you do your restorative practice work. And I'm going to kick us off by passing to Tito.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tito Campbell. I go by pronouns he, him. My region I'm tuning in from is Minneapolis, Minnesota, here in the Midwest, lovely Midwest. I'm a restorative justice specialist for the Department of Corrections. And the landmark that I would lift up, because we are in the land of 10,000 lakes, and I live very near one of the most popular lakes, is Bede-Makaska. I visit the lake quite often, very soothing, very good place to go exercise and just get fresh air and relax and restore yourself. That I'll pass.
Thank you, Tito. My name is Elizabeth Hilt. I commonly go by Elle, and I am calling in today from North Dakota, which is the traditional and ancestral lands of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate Nation, the Spirit Lake Nation, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Mandan Hidatsa Rickawa Nation, and Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. I am the associate director of an agency that is based in our state capital, which is in central North Dakota in Bismarck, though I live on the eastern side of the state, right across the Red River from Minnesota. I live in Fargo, North Dakota. Our agency is responsible for running the state's sole community-based restorative justice program. And so we serve justice-involved individuals, both youth and adults, as well as some schools. And so we keep very, very busy. In terms of the land and lifting up the land, like I said, I live on the east side of the state. I am a Minnesota girl at heart. I was born and raised in Minnesota. On the eastern side of North Dakota, we have such beautiful woods and water. Not quite the water masses that Minnesota has, but I do love just being in woods and around trees. So that's what I will lift up today.
Hello, everyone. I am Cheryl Wilson. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I am coming to you from North Newton, Kansas. And it is the ancestral home of the Wichita, Kaw, and Osage nations. And I am a Vice President of Culture and Belonging at Bethel College. And Bethel is about 30 minutes away from Wichita, for those of you who are familiar with Kansas. And one of the, I would say the thing that I think about related to the land is the Flint Hills. The Flint Hills really is a gorgeous expanse of land that is it just shows the bedrock of Kansas, and it is flat. Kansas tends to be flatter in this part of the state, and kind of a rolling hills. And it just shows the expanse of the sky. That's one of the things that stands out about this part of the country for me. And the sector that I do my work is in higher education. Of course, at Bethel College, but I also have an affiliation with the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, which I recently vacated my role as executive director. And that is a community-based organization that does a lot of work around the state in restorative practices, and also in intervention work locally.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Riley. My pronouns are she, her. I am located in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is the capital of Nebraska, and I work for the judicial branch. But my office is actually, it was just renamed actually, I think 2 years ago, Chief Standing Bear Judicial Administration Building. So we have a very neat bronze statue of Chief Standing Bear outside the building, and just an amazing mural inside the building. And we actually have 4 tribal nations in Nebraska. We have Omaha, Winnebago, Northern Ponca, and Santee Sioux. In my role with the judicial branch, I'm actually an administrator, so I provide oversight to our mediation centers across the state, and work with them in promoting restorative justice and doing education, etc. But one of the pieces of the land, and I had to, I relate well to Cheryl because Nebraska and Kansas are very similar. And actually we have I-80 that goes right across Nebraska. And so a lot of people, that's their view of Nebraska. But we have something called the sandhills. So you have to get off of the interstate, and those sandhills are beautiful. They are actually grass stabilized sand dunes. And so it's nice and rolling, and it's beautiful. So when people say Nebraska is flat, part of it, yes, but not all of it. So if you ever get the chance to be up in northwestern Nebraska, those sandhills are beautiful.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining. My name is Elena Quintana, and I am a director at the Institute on Public Safety and Social Justice at Adler University. I use she, her pronouns, and I join you from Chicago on the shores of Lake Michigan. Chicago remains the home to a very diverse group of indigenous nations that live in the land today. It is the ancestral homelands, the unceded ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi.
Everyone, I'm Elena. Were you done? I hope I didn't jump in. Okay. I'm Dr. Ann Hobbs. I'm the director of the Juvenile Justice Institute at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, which is in Lincoln and is in Omaha, Nebraska. So we have 2 campuses. Kelly kind of discussed the original stewards of our land here, but I would add the Pawnee as well. One of the land features that I would highlight underneath our flat surfaces and the sandhills of Nebraska is one of the world's largest aquifers. So when I first moved here, I was fascinated by that. And the space that I work in, I do predominantly research around restorative practices, especially in the juvenile justice world, but across criminal justice systems as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Woodard. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am the Vice President of Equity and Inclusion at Anoka Ramsey Community College and Anoka Technical College, which are also located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the original homelands of the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, and the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. I am a transplant to Minnesota, so one of the things that sticks out in my mind is the Quarry Park, which is just outside of Waite Park, Minnesota, which is in the central area of Minnesota. I haven't had an opportunity to travel much farther north than that, but it's in that space where I feel connected to the history and of not only the land, but the history of the geography, the industry, the migration. So I'm grateful to be joining you. And as Cheryl and others have mentioned, I am also in higher education.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you to each of our panelists. I'll go ahead and share information about me as well. My name is Carrie Landrum. I use she, they pronouns. I'm tuning in from Metro Detroit in Michigan. And if you don't know, Michigan is an Ojibwe word meaning great water. And so I absolutely want to lift up our waters, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But like Elena and Brandon, I'm on Anishinaabe land and also Wyandot land. So the Council of the Three Fires in particular, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, who are all some of the many Anishinaabe tribes. And I would like to share that one of the original names for Detroit, which was named by the French, Detroit, meaning of the straits, one of the original names for Detroit is Wawiyatanong, which means the crooked shores. And that is referring to the crooked shores of the Detroit River, and the Detroit River separating what is now Canada and the United States. So I actually go south to get to Canada, which is really fun. And so I want to give a shout out to our Great Lakes, the ones that surround Michigan, Lake Superior, and Lake Huron. And also we touch Lake Erie just a little bit. And I also want to name that I happened to be at Lake Huron yesterday, and the Huron is also another name that's not what the Wyandot refer to themselves as. So I want to acknowledge the Wyandot, who Lake Huron is named after, and give a shout out to all of those great waters. So thank you to each of our panelists. And I want to share that when we got together and had our really great discussion, talking about what are we up to in the Midwest and what do we want to share in this webinar today, there seemed to be a lot of energy and buzz around shifting culture and shifting minds. And of course, part of restorative practices work is shifting culture and shifting minds. So would love to hear from each of our panelists. What are some successes and or challenges that you've encountered while trying to shift culture and advance restorative culture change from where you are? And I'll pass over to you, Tito.
Thank you again, Carrie. So I do work into carceral settings in Minnesota here. Also, I was justice impacted myself. So just the thought of me being incarcerated and now working for the place that I once was incarcerated at. So the culture shift that I would say that I've had the most success with while inside prison, I served on a Restorative Justice Council. Restorative Justice Council just fed the need to help heal the community that we lived in, and that community was inside Stillwater Prison at the time. So things that we found success in doing was RJ one-on-one classes, teaching others about RJ, the basics, and just understanding that giving people a space to be able to heal, I think was a great success in healing that culture and that community that we shared. That also helped bring along staff in a way where usually, you have this divided line between staff and the incarcerated folks. But we had some staff that, crossed that line, helped out. So that was a win in itself as well, I would say. And now being a part of the DLC in the central office, I am the head of all the council. So that's a culture shift in itself with myself. So, I mean, going inside prison after you serve so much time, you have some people who probably would think, why is he here? And my job was to continue to show up and continue to show up for those who invited me to be a part of that healing, because I think we're all still on healing journeys, and that it's important for us to go along those journeys and have people to assist us in that healing. And so, even though sometimes it feels like that I'm fighting a battle upstream, I understand that there are people who accept and need this, and also myself, because I'm still healing myself. And I think even going back inside the prisons and being able to still contribute to helping and healing has helped me heal even more and helped me open up and to accept even the bad. I think, or those things, or those places where we don't see the win. I try to look at the things on a deeper level, because I think every time that I do show up, it peels away a little more at whoever may have something angst against it. And then they will understand the heart and the understanding that, what restorative justice is trying to do. I believe that what we have done here in Minnesota, especially like, hiring someone who was once formerly incarcerated and now going back inside prisons with, with a position where, this position that I have is not only to facilitate or, run the councils, is also, to create programs and to create connections to the community and organizations with restorative justice that will embrace people who come home from prison, because we know that it is set up in a way where you have this stigma against you when you come home from prison. And it's a lot of barriers. So it's like that unspoken sentence that you have. And so my job is to understand, to help people navigate and to connect with people who will embrace them and continue the process of being restored back to their communities as well. So I believe that we've had more successes than not. And the ones that we have not, I just say that they haven't happened yet. I believe that, in time, as we continue to show up in these spaces and we continue to plant these seeds in these spaces, that we would have opportunity to grow in those spaces. With that, I will pass.
Thank you so much, Tito. I love that word yet, that really important yet, and your focus on healing. Before I pass to Elizabeth, I wanted to make a note to our attendees who are listening today. If you are feeling very interested in what you're hearing and you have follow-up questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom window. Those questions that you might be interested in posing will come to the panelists, and we'll see if we can try to answer them either live while speaking, or we might be able to write in some answers to any questions you might have. So feel free to use that feature, and I'll pass over to you, Elizabeth.
Well, first of all, thank you, Tito, for sharing that work. I am very excited also to share within the last couple of years that the North Dakota State Penitentiary, we have one maximum security state prison. And a couple of years ago, they partnered with the Vera Institute and Restoring Promise Initiative. And so there's actually a unit within our prison that is a restorative justice-based unit. And I've been so privileged and honored and humbled to be supportive of some of the work that they're doing there. And I just get so excited when I hear about the restorative justice work that's being done inside our carceral institution. So thank you for the work that you do. When I was reflecting on this question, I realized that North Dakota is, I think we're pretty lucky. The reason that North Dakota has restorative justice programming in it to begin with is because the system's leaders actually wanted it first. Dating way back into 1998, 1999, our North Dakota Juvenile Court and Division of Juvenile Services leaders had gone to a conference. They heard about restorative justice, really thought that this was something that they needed to do for justice-involved youth, and came back, asked a statewide nonprofit to develop the program, and that's really where we got started. So it was almost like we already had the system buy-in from the very get-go. 5-10 years later, kind of similar situation with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, realizing and going to a conference and finding out that this really does have benefits for victims of adult crime. They came back and came to the organization that at the time held the program and said, let's partner. And so that's where we started working with adults some. I already spoke about the DOCR, the Unity Village. That's, like I said, very recent in our histories, but we are, working now directly with the residents or the inmates that are in the prison as well. Schools have sought out our services or sought out trainings, to address student needs and to meet the needs of their school culture as well. So I feel like I've been in my role now for approximately 6 years. And I have a lengthy history of working in restorative justice. I worked in Minnesota early in my career, and I remember being the lone messenger, bringing it in, and how very different it is. Because I can tell you that in the 6 years that I've been in my role, I have never felt like we needed to ask people to consider working with us. Like it's always coming to us. And so for that reason, I almost feel like our culture is working backwards, because so often like the community is what informs the systems and the policy. But I feel like where our biggest challenge really is, we already have the system buy-in, we already have some policy in place. Our challenge is bringing that down to the community level. And how do we really, if we're going to have a culture shift, it's got to be with our neighbors, the people that we actually live next door to, the people that we pass in the grocery store and such. So I think that North Dakota is really a front runner when it comes to restorative justice. We're very grateful for the partnerships that have allowed us to do this work, and that their trust and their faith in us. We still, of course, have some room to grow, as anybody does, but yeah, I think that we are really lucky in North Dakota. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate you saying, how do we bring it to everybody, to the people in the grocery stores? I have some thoughts on that I'll intend to share later. Cheryl, I'd love to hear from you.
I know when I think about where I'm at, I have to cheat. Okay, so I can't play by the rules. I am so there's a couple of ways that I've gotten to have a lens around what's going on in the country, because I am a former board member and board president of the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice. So because I've had that lens for about a decade up until recently, I got to see what was happening around the country before I came to Kansas. And one of the places, and this is part of my cheat as well, that I lived for a long time is Minnesota. And I'd be remiss if I didn't name that my Midwestern roots go way deep. So all of that to say, coming here, the thing that is really interesting about Kansas is it is a state where there's a lot happening that is around restorative practices. There are a lot of things that are happening, not always connected until fairly recently, where we were intentional about creating a platform where we could connect as a separate conference that would happen in the off years of the National Conference on Restorative Justice. So we became Restorative Kansas. So it's a network of individual practitioners and people in higher ed, people in community-based work. And not only that, I have to also loop in our Missouri folks. There are a lot of folks in Missouri that partner with us as well. Although we wear the name Restorative Kansas, it's including those folks as in our number. Many of us do our works in similar ways that people talked about, being the lone messenger. I hear that, and also being, kind of in silos. And what has happened is we have grown in strength in being connected and doing things in community. In our little hamlet of North Newton, there's there are two big organizations, I'll say, like KIPCOR is an organization that partners often with Offender Victim Ministries, which is a community-based organization. I just mentioned that because we're right in each other's backyards. And so a lot of times we have partnered or we have talked about the community may even access us in similar ways. As far as the way that sometimes we have challenges, is it might be in the ways that people are understanding restorative justice. What is it? How can I do this in my particular organization? And what we find often is we are trying very hard to make sure people get to participate in practices. We can do a ton of these, uh, presentations, and people until they experience it, they're not quite grasping what is needed. And so what I find is so important is us getting people involved in circle processes around different issues. We're also we're big on intervention work around here. Not just what keeps me grounded as a person who does this work is the practice that I get to constantly be engaged with in doing intervention work. Um, I I am so fortunate when I think about the ways that work has come through the doors of KIPCOR by people just walking in off the street that say they need help. Students that say, I need help in getting along with someone in my dorm, or people in the community saying, we need help in our family. We need help at this organization. That has literally happened all the time. And the coolest thing that has happened that challenged me the most, and I still, my knees are still knocking because my job is so new. But our president saying to me, because of the work that we had been connecting with around helping people to deal in areas of difference, especially around, and dare I say the loaded words DE and I, but diversity, equity, and inclusion work had been kind of ancillary to the work that we had been doing at KIPCOR. And as I had an opportunity to meet with our president, he said, there's a position that had been vacant and in that role. And he said, you seem passionate about this. I would like for you to come and work in this role. And it rocked my world because I wasn't looking to leave the work that I've been doing at KIPCOR. But I am so excited to do restorative practices within this role of helping people to think about belonging and what that means connected to our identities. And there's all kinds of things that I'm dealing with currently in this new chapter. And a lot of it has, I am so grateful that I have these skills and the training to be able to do restorative practices to help me to advance that work. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Cheryl. So in Nebraska, as I mentioned, so I work for the judicial branch. So I'm truly administrative, but I have the unique pleasure of working with community mediation centers. So in Nebraska, we were set up that every Nebraskan, every county is covered by a community mediation center. And the system was set up in the early 90s. And for the longest time, they have done restorative justice. But back in the early days, they focused on victim offender mediation. And so that's what we called it. And then in 2015, my predecessor and the centers really had a concerted effort of focusing on youth restorative justice. So it started with a pilot and went statewide. But one of the things that they really focused on is what is it? And so they focused on one specific service, technically victim offender mediation, but we sort of flipped it. And we were working with folks from Minnesota. And so we now call it victim youth conferencing. So because we want people to recognize we're working with the youth. Yes, they might have committed an offense, but they are youth. And also it's a conference, it's dialogue based. That is different than mediation. So we really looked at the language that we use. But I also want to talk about one very specific challenge that we've had. And unlike L, so ours has been very community based, building up. And one of our challenges is actually with defense attorneys, because with restorative justice, we all know that just by the nature of doing it, the youth takes responsibility for their actions. And so while we have in statute that it's confidential, the defense attorneys are like, we know that, but you just know if they participated in this process, they've said that they have accountability. So if it doesn't work out in restorative justice, I'm setting my client back. So we're still trying to have that conversation of how can restorative justice still be a positive process and getting that across. So we still have a ways to go. And hopefully we'll get to where North Dakota is, or we've got all that buy-in from the top level down, and we can meet in the middle and there's complete support. So we're working on that.
Mute. Okay. I'm going to talk about a couple of wins in Illinois, and I think that they are significant, and I'm very grateful for them. First of all, our lieutenant governor is an RJ practitioner, and this is like not a small benefit. It really is amazing. It's put into budgets. I think that people find it like just off the bat, because I've been to lots of states, and when you don't have electeds that are supportive or understanding of what restorative justice is, it makes a lot of things harder, particularly when you want to change large systems. So I think that's a huge win. Another thing that I think is a win is the development of all of the science around trauma. The trauma-informed sciences, like people have so much science, and so people are looking at, neurobiology and epigenetics. And I think that it's so important to pair those with restorative justice as something that supports all of the brain science and how to best address trauma. And so as we're thinking, like when people are thinking, well, wow, look at all this damage that trauma does, what's the answer? Well, we've had the answer all along. It's restorative justice, right? Spoiler alert. So those are the wins. And I think we have definitely challenges. We've invested like wholesale, like for a long, long time in many systems that are antithetical to restorative justice, that are very punishing and that actually make things worse. Like often, and I can't speak to every state, but I know that there are aspects of the education system, the legal system, healthcare system, immigration system that are really slow to understand what I think is a moral mandate to better understand the usages of restorative philosophies and practices, just because it's like when you know better, you do better. And so I think that we need to start pairing restorative justice more actively with all of the science that we have so that we can actively do better within those large systems. That's what I got. And
I'm a little bit jealous, Elena, because we have really great, like, I'll start with what I'm grateful for. In Nebraska, we have really good infrastructure because restorative practices came out of the Farm Act in the 80s and 90s, like the language and some of the centers and the infrastructure, right? The bones are here, and it's a really comfortable like place to practice, I would say, although I'm not a practitioner. I think the downside of that, though, is that sometimes it becomes commonplace. And I find that sometimes we'll have, especially in the juvenile justice world, we'll label things as RJ, but then when you get a close-up look, it's maybe not so restorative. And then the other, I would say, challenge is because we've had such a strong practitioner and a strong use in the juvenile justice world, there's a little bit of this can't be used at the higher levels. And so there's some pushback when you really want to go for a more in-depth case, or we're doing some work in the prisons right now, but I think that sometimes there's pushback, right? And then although we have good infrastructure and great leadership like Kelly, I would love, like, you know, at the high up political levels, to have a restorative justice practitioner. That just melts my heart, Elena. I'm envious. So that's what I have.
You all are impressive, and I'm grateful to be in community with you. Um, working in higher education and doing this work, particularly at public institutions, a community college and a technical college, what I've found has been one of the ways I've been able to find a little bit of success is in by using restorative practices without necessarily labeling them as such. And what I found is that people will start thinking of me as, well, you're nice, you listen really well. I mean, all the things that we know that restorative justice is. And I'm like, well, yeah. I had the opportunity to bring some restorative justice training to my college. And I intentionally did not do the training myself, but I brought in a community partner, Mediation and Restorative Services, fun acronym of MARS. So I brought MARS to Minnesota. But what I found was that the people who engaged, they really got into it. And when I had a an institutional initiative where I had every academic and administrative department needing to put forth some goals related to um, the belongingness, restoration, inclusion, diversity, growth, equity, and sustainability. Many of the departments would say we'd really like to have some restorative circles in our department because we're hurting. And based off of what when I heard that, my heart was warm. I was like, oh, good. Some people are starting to understand that this is valuable. But then I listened a little bit deeper, and some of the folks were proposing that because they were entering into that space with the mentality of I want to fix them. It's like let's go ahead and back off a little bit because this is not about fixing them. This is about us being a better community of healing and then figuring out how we do this work in community with each other. And so that's also been one of the challenges that I've faced is that my boss, who happens to be the president, jokingly but seriously also says, I'm the touchy-feely guy. And I am the touchy-feely guy. And I'm also aware of the dynamic of being showing up in the world as a cisgender Black man who talks about love, who talks about restoration, who talks about healing, etc., and how that occasionally throws people off and that they don't want to engage in the work of emotional intelligence of engaging and being authentically human in the human experience because obviously it's a lot easier to be behind the protective shell of the facades that we put on day in day out. One of the other benefits, though, is that the state of Minnesota, or Minnesota State, which is the overarching system of colleges and universities under which my two fall, they have implemented some informal resolution practices that are integrating some elements of restorative justice. So I'm excited about that as well. But I would say, really, as I think about my work in higher education and this particular institutions and this particular context and time, it's that really we are not community. We actually have to start at the foundation of what RJ is and actually engage in becoming community first. And as many of you probably can assume, there may be a challenge or two about people wanting to actually acknowledge that they are sharing space and humanity with each other. So I'll turn it back over to you, Carrie, for now.
Thank you, Brandon, so much. And thank you to all of you. So much wisdom here, so much wisdom. I love it. And I want to keep this momentum moving with more lessons learned. Our next question is, what have been your challenges and or successes in spreading awareness about restorative practices in your area, including any marketing or messaging strategies? And I'm going to pass it over again to Tito, followed by Elena for this one.
So, I would say one of the successes that just kind of happened not too long ago, probably like last week. I was introduced to a gentleman named go by the name of Dantes Johnson, who has a podcast for Lucid Love Society, and I had the privilege to sit down and give them an interview of my life story. Also, inside that interview was a segue into the lives of the men and women that do restorative justice work behind the wall inside the facilities. Like I say, we have 10 facilities and we have 8 councils in those facilities, each facility, consisting of people, a number of people from, I would say 15 or 12 to 15 per council. And they do a lot of heavy work inside the facility. They are looked at as pillars. And I know for myself, when I was introduced to restorative justice inside, I always thought like, wow, why does not anybody know about this? Like, we have these stigmas that set up that, if you go to prison and you're just this bad person, and not understanding that we have people inside doing great work, that is reaching inside the communities. In these facilities, we have 2 to 3 fundraisers that the councils put together each year, where they buy certain items that are not on canteen, and the community buys them, so they get something extra. And also the monies that are being accumulated are being sent out to victim and restorative justice services out in our communities. And we have raised tens of thousands of dollars over the years, and this is like unknown to the community. So when I think about spreading that message and getting that out in this podcast, like I say, bringing the segue into the lives and the work that these men and women do inside facilities, is to help to embrace those who come back home, and not just sit and just have this stigma towards them as you have this mark against you, but they've actually have done great deals of work, and continue to do this type of work. And most importantly, like I say, through the education that they serve with their community, giving education to about restorative justice is huge. So it just happened for us. I continue to work to make those connections inside the community, to accept and embrace those who are coming home and doing this restorative work. So we got a lot to look forward to here in Minnesota. And also, I just want to add too, we have a great commissioner who is also a professor of restorative justice, that is leading this charge for us in our department. And I think that speaks volumes, that for me being hired as one, and just the work that he's allowing us to do. So that I'll pass.
My work has mostly been in the public safety realm, and I started a long time ago with violence prevention in Chicago. And in 1999, there was basically lots and lots of killings in Chicago, tons of them, like, I don't know, 800 maybe. It was a lot every year. There's tons of killings and even more shootings. And I was an evaluation coordinator for an effort called Ceasefire at that time. And we started without any intervention, asking a bunch of people in Chicago, how hopeful are you that things can change? And like very few people said yes. It was like less than 5%. And we just handed out yard signs that said, increase the peace. That's all they said, increase the peace. People put them in their lawns, and we put them in the places where there were the most shootings and killings in the city. And then 6 months later, we went back, did a post test, and said, how hopeful are you that things can change? And about 2/3 of the people said, I'm hopeful that things can change. And there was no money for an intervention. There were yard signs, right? And it became really clear to me how important it is to mobilize people, for people to be hopeful first, right? And I think that we have been like years and years and years with this retributive legal system in this country that has, in some ways, shape, or form, we've bought into the war on drugs or the war on crime or the super predator model. And even if we say we haven't bought into it, people can't think of people not going to prison, or, I mean, there's lots of things that I think it just seeps into our mindset about what do you do about crime? You punish someone, right? You don't, and punishment, we don't think about the relationship. Does punishment make the world safer? It doesn't. So I started thinking about my days in violence prevention and how important it is to start really kind of helping people think differently about public safety. And so we actually created a couple of strategies. If Avery could show, there's some slides. We came up with a bunch of messages, it's targeted messages. Justice is not revenge, justice is healing. What does restorative mean? Like, a lot of people were really interested, and that one did very well, and I don't know why, but it did. Restorative justice is about healing harm and more, so that we just kind of get people thinking about what is restorative justice and what does it have to do with public safety. So next slide. Hurt people, heal people, heal people. Restorative justice heals people, and healing is public safety. When you get these together, these are just simple messages that help reprogram people's minds, help get people thinking in a different way. And we went big with these. We started going like, you want to show the next one? This is a tale of a bus. We had a bunch of bus ads that were all around the city. This one says restorative justice invests in community healing, right? Take action, help fund a future promise. This is just really got people talking. A lot of lawmakers saw this. People were like, what does this mean? A lot of people went to the website for the restorative justice hubs, which we convened. And then we went big, because go big or go home, with this very large billboard that was like, if anybody goes to Chicago, it's at the nexus of the 94 and the 55. And like, those are two huge interstates. And so I would see this all the time, right? And I just loved it that it's there. And so it really does challenge those retributive mindsets with the public education campaign. So I just want to put that out there as like, it's so important to, in big ways and small ways, to constantly think about the messaging that you have to get people putting a different default message in their mind. Like, is justice punishment? No, justice is healing. Let's talk about it. So.
I love that so much, Elena. Those messages, those signs are so inspiring to me, and I'm sure probably everybody listening. I love that healing is public safety. That was the one that really stood out to me. And I love your your call. How are we spreading hope? I think that's a huge purpose that we serve as RJ messengers and movement builders. And Tito, I heard you expressing that in various ways too. How are we spreading hope, and how are we not just accepting but embracing and welcoming our returning citizens when they're returning home? And how are we getting out that messaging, whether it's on the back of a bus or on a podcast? And I hope, Tito, you can find a way to share with all of our listeners that podcast that you were on. I know I'd like to listen to that. So I'm glad that you were able to share that. So for our next question, want to ask, we talked a lot about, what does it mean to be in community when we were preparing for this podcast, all the panelists. So this question is, when you think about community, what does it mean to you to actually be in community and actually engage in community and implementing restorative practices and facilitating healing? And then we also talked about not just healing that's like a Band-Aid, but healing that is transformational in nature. And if I remember, Tito, it was you who mentioned, like, we don't want to just do Band-Aid healing. We want some transformational, real juicy stuff. And I'm loving this thread of healing that we're on right now. So I'd love to pass it over to you, Tito, and then hear from Brandon.
Well, of course, like I say, and I agree with you, Elena, like, hurt people, and heal people, heal people. That is just so true for restorative justice. And inside incarceral settings, there's a lot of hurt people who have hurt people that needs a lot of healing. So when I'm in community, it's with those who are on that path of healing, or those who need assistance in the path of healing. So we have the opportunity to put together a restorative justice committee of formerly incarcerated individuals who have since come home and are in the community doing healing and doing the service of restorative justice practices. And just being in community with those individuals, being allowed to have them go back inside facilities and speaking and engaging in restorative justice ways with the community that's on the inside. It's all just so rich in community to myself. I believe that one thing I understood, that people like to listen, or like or they're more accepting to those who have walked in the shoes that they've walked in, right? And when we have these individuals who have lived this life and have, you know, found restorative justice and created a space for them within themselves and their lives and their families, and then to be able to share that with others, that is huge for me, and that's community. I have this with my family, just me returning home and understanding that, you know, the norm wasn't really the norm. It was actually a broken, you know, it was a broken family in a sense where, you know, certain things were held high and other things were like, you know, we don't talk about those things. And so understanding with restorative justice, and like we said, like the healing comes when you are digging deep, and when you're asking the hard questions, and when you're attempting to answer those hard questions, especially when it comes to family. So I find myself in community like restorative justice in my family, and providing this healing to my family that I've realized that, you know, was not the right thing through restorative justice. So I believe that those things that I hold true in community, and just responding to people that I relate to, and those who I want to educate, because I believe too that's community. When you are educating someone who don't understand, and understanding brings about a whole new true healing from those who do understand, don't understand. So yeah, that's, I believe understanding, like that's where I'm at. That's where restorative justice, that's where community lies with me, is the gathering that understanding from, you know, all sides of the coin, and seeing what we can come up with.
Thank you, Tito. You know, I've been in higher ed since 1999, and I've been doing diversity, equity, inclusion, international, multicultural, intercultural work the entirety of that time. So I've gotten comfortable having difficult conversations and bringing up topics that most folks would run in the opposite direction of. I also have the positionality in my current role, to say we are going to try and make the institution restorative. So the framework that we're using for our diversity I mentioned earlier was bridges, with belongingness and restoration as the R, right? And so I use restorative practices when I run meetings. I also invite people into the space of being fully human. What I've noticed in thinking about the healing, and the larger picture of being in community then, is that if you haven't been given the opportunity to think about what it is you want for healing, it's hard to answer that question on the spot, especially when you're sitting in that pain, and you're steeped in the narrative and the socialization that says my healing is supposed to look like punishment for you. You're supposed to be fired. You're supposed to be publicly shamed. Um, Changing the narrative for folks is significant, though. We recognize that for systems change, that yes, we have to change policies, practices, and procedures, but then we have to go a deeper level, and we have to think about, okay, so how are we structuring things? And then you got to go a deeper level still and think about, how am I structuring things? How am I showing up in this work? How am I engaging in the work of being in community, particularly if you've got a coworker who you don't like, or in a particularly tough situation, you've got a supervisor that you are struggling to work with. Then what do you do? How do you navigate that well, right? For me, I recognize that many of my colleagues, um, we made the broad assumption that because you're as old as you are and you work in this institution, that you know how to communicate well, that you know how to listen well, that you know how to problem solve well. And in reality, we have some skills, but not the skills we need for us to actually be healthy and more productive. And in, in that sense, later on. And so what I've done with at my institutions is I keep pushing and I keep bringing to them restorative practices. My hope is to eventually one day, if I'm not mistaken, there's a school out east of them in Pennsylvania, I think, that's starting an associate's degree program in restorative practices. I would love it if we got to that point where not only do we have the academic foundation, but we allow our students to do the practicing with their college, their college mates at the college, but also in the community as part of our service learning and our experiential learning. That's a long way to go. I mean, and in essence, because we're talking about culture, I recognize that culture change, as many of you recognize and understand, culture change takes time. And the energy that you have to put forth to start something is way different than the energy to sustain it or to grow it. And so when I think about the reality of healing is we all are in desperate need of healing. I'd like for I guess my colleagues, my cultures to understand that we don't have to be in competition of who's healing or who needs more healing or whose pain is greater. It's like, nope, we don't have to play the oppression Olympics. We all have some work to do. And this is where sometimes it gets a little challenging for other folks to hear, which is if you're part of a minoritized, a marginalized group of folks who have consistently, historically, and even in contemporary times are pushed to the outside, you too have some work to do on the healing front. That none of us are exempt from the socialization that put a hierarchy of humans in place. So we've got to dismantle that as well. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Brandon and Tito. I just love all the wisdom that I'm hearing and witnessing and getting to be a part of. Some of the things I pulled out from that is bringing in family and workplaces as part of our community, and how are we bringing in restorative practices into our families and our workspaces, starting at home and starting where we spend most of our time in our workplaces for many of us who spend more time there. And we don't have to be in competition of healing. And I want to lift up Tito's wisdom that understanding brings about a whole and true healing, and that educating is also an important part of being in community. So as I mentioned earlier, our panelists, when we got together and thought about what do we want to share with the broader community, one of the things we kept returning to again and again is how do we advance culture change? And one of the things we talked about is how do we, as those who are advancing restorative justice movement, restorative practices, how do we intentionally make space for people of color and elevate the voices of people of color as we work to affect culture change and engage in community? So love to hear from you, Brandon, again, and then Elizabeth, and then I'll chime in as well.
Depending on your positionality in your context, wherever you are, we know that there is a hierarchy of who is, quote, dominant and who's minoritized and who's marginalized. The United States, the Midwest, we're still operating under this system of systemic oppression that manifests itself as whiteness. Understand that I'm talking about whiteness, not white people. And because whiteness is something that many folks beyond race and ethnicity can adopt and adapt. So we're operating in this space of whiteness, and this is a way to do things. So if you think about Tema Okun's work on white supremacy culture and how you disrupt it, people of color are still subjected to being in comparison to the center of whiteness. Restorative justice, I think, because of its indigenous roots across the world, can disrupt that and dismantle that, where we put our humanity in the center, as well as own our races, our ethnicities. And as me, as again, as a Black man in the United States of America, particularly in Minneapolis, like Tito, like being a Black man in Minneapolis, there are days when you have to worry and you have to wonder. With restorative practices, though, I see an opportunity for racial justice and racial equity to be born and sustained, because it allows for us to be honest about how we enter into the space whoever's in the space. When we don't acknowledge the historical harms that are undergirding where we are right now, that have us in this particular moment in time, and we don't acknowledge the experiences that indigenous folks and other people of color have been having on this land, in this space, in this place, right? What you're doing is you're stripping away agency, you're stripping away story. Restorative justice, again, disrupts that, dismantles that, because in my mind, we all have work to do. We all have harm, we all need healing, as Tito mentioned. As people of color, one of the things that some of us, I'm not gonna put a blanket statement out for all people of color because we are not monolithic by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the healing pieces that we need, that some of us need to engage with either intellectually or with our hearts, is what would it look like for us to begin to trust that there are non-BIPOC folks who actually are in solidarity with us, who are willing to do real work in their lives every single day? What would it feel like for us to trust that there are real allies who are not just performative or who are not just virtue signaling? Restorative justice, I think, is that space and that place for us. There's so much more I could say, but I'll pass it over to my fellow panelist, Al.
Oh my gosh, Brandon, that was fantastic. And I think about as you were questioning about trust, in my notes, I put down radical trust, and I just want to speak briefly on this. Our agency has been tasked with starting the state's first Restorative Practices Council to address racial and ethnic disparities in our justice systems, as well as our exclusionary disciplinary data out of our schools. And I really want to just speak directly, honestly, and vulnerably to anyone who is white on this call, because I don't know about you. I am really tired of systems and individuals saying that they want marginalized people or BIPOC people to feel like they have an authentic role or feel like they are involved in the decision making. I wrote down here, I said, I'm tired of reserving seats at a table, thinking that the table is even mine to begin with. If you're going to do or say anything around racial equity and justice, what I have learned in this project that we're working on is to really go boldly. We have an advisory group that is working on the early development of this Restorative Practices Council. Since Black and Brown youth are most impacted by these services, we want the standards and the implementation of this council to reflect the perspectives of the lived experiences of the people who are most impacted by them. For that purpose, we have an advisory work group that is in North Dakota, which is 83% white. We have an advisory work group that is made up of entirely people of color. It's coordinated by an Indigenous peacemaker. And I can really speak honestly to the fact that it is awkward to be a white woman in a position of authority, ultimately responsible for the efforts of this project. And yet, and this is where that radical trust comes from, to radically trust that I don't have to have a hand in it. I'm really grateful for our coordinator because she knows that I'm an ally. She knows that I'm even an accomplice to this work. I think that was a word Cheryl used to use, an accomplice to justice. And she's even called me out a couple times to say, like, you're taking back control, like you're trying to insert yourself, you know? And we as white people are products of systems that have given us that power and that control, and we've claimed it as our right somehow. It does feel uncomfortable to not have a vote at this table. It's weird. It seems strange. But anyway, all this to say, you got to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable. You got to go boldly. You got to get out of the way. If you as a white person feel like you hold power, please intentionally find ways to transfer that power to the people who are most affected by the decisions that you want to make. It's been such a learning opportunity for us. We are really feeling that we're doing this right, and you know, from the people that are involved so far have shared feedback that they also feel that this is different. This is a different conversation that they're used to having. This isn't tokenization. This is really authentic engagement. So that's what I have to say. I'll pass it to whomever was going to speak next. Maybe it was Cheryl.
I'm going to speak and then I'm going to pass to Cheryl. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so powerful. I love this topic a lot and appreciate everything I've heard. I will be watching this video just so I can go back and re-listen to what you both just said. But I want to share a couple of thoughts as well, especially since I'm representing Detroit, one of the blackest cities in the United States, depending on which what measurement you're looking at. Anyway, so I serve on what is called the Cultivating Committee, which is essentially the board of the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network, which is a special project of the Just Cities Lab at the Detroit Justice Center. And the leadership team is made up of 4 fabulous women of color and myself. And I wanted to name that part of making space for people of color and elevating the voices of people of color at its most basic is simply, as you were saying, I think, Elizabeth, supporting and uplifting initiatives and leadership efforts led by people of color. And if we're not noticing them, taking the time to find them, look for them, support what's already being done, or ask, how can I help you? Or we waited for invitation before we enter communities to just say like, oh, I know what's best here, but look to the leaders that are already here. And I have the distinct privilege and honor of working with 4 amazing people and many, many others. So I wanted to share a couple of the things that the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network has engaged in specifically and very intentionally make space for people of color in this movement. So first of all, we're leading multiple restorative justice trainings for Detroiters to spread awareness about restorative justice in the city and also to build capacity to facilitate restorative justice, et cetera, and get it into our communities. We offer this 20-hour trainings over the course of 5 weeks. Now, some organizations might charge for their RJ trainings and maybe they have to make payroll. I get it. Some organizations might offer sliding scale fees to acknowledge economic discrepancies and ways that folks like people of color have been systemically marginalized in intersecting ways. So they might take a more equitable approach to charging training fees through sliding scales. Some organizations may not charge anything at all for trainings or services in order to make the experience affordable for all. The Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network actually paid our training participants for their time and their effort out of acknowledgement that, especially in light of our racialized economic disparities and systemic racism, asking folks like Detroiters who are working hard at multiple jobs, working atypical schedules like in the gig economy, et cetera, to ask them to attend a 5-week training of 4 hours of session is asking a lot. It's asking folks to give up time that they could be out making money. So attending an RJ training could very well result in an income deficit. So we actually received grants from 2 different organizations to pay all of our participants $600 a person to participate in our 20-hour training. And we scheduled the training for Saturday mornings and Sunday afternoons to allow for and support maximum participation. And another way we support including folks is providing childcare at our trainings and also having ASL interpreters available and needed, which was also grant funded. And finally, I wanted to mention that a stipend was provided to the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network Cultivating Committee members to recognize and compensate folks for their time as volunteers. We know volunteering is often hard and thankless work, and we know that volunteering requires a certain level of economic security to afford one space to volunteer. So again, in recognition and wanting to support folks, and particularly people of color in their volunteer inclinations, we offer stipends to those leading out the work. And by the way, I also want to mention that we connect this work to wellness work and to harm reduction. We have found that really effective in multiple sectors I'm engaging in. We're tying the restorative justice work to wellness work. And so one of our grant funders is a global public health organization. So wanted to give a shout out to where we might look creatively to find our funding. And also I just wanted to share decisions that I can make every single day, every single week. I'm regularly making decisions. So I was asked to write a chapter for a book on RJ, and I reached out to a couple of colleagues of color. I would like to bring your voices in, lift up your voices. Would you like to contribute some words? When I submitted my bio for this webinar, I included the names of Angel McKissick, Belinda Dolan, Barbara L. Jones, and Tashmika Torak, who are on the Cultivating Committee, so that I can elevate and lift up their work. And I did that intentionally. And as I'm moderating, I'm intentionally offering, Tito, first and foremost, every time, returning citizen, I want to elevate your voice. Has justice impacted in this conversation about justice? So just being mindful of every little day decisions we make. Let's see if there's anything else that I wanted to share. Oh, one other thing, small decisions we make. I'm regularly asked to facilitate for places and spaces like across campus at the university where I work. And so when I'm doing centering, opening, centering, closing, I can choose whose voice am I going to lift up. And I am regularly, very intentionally choosing to elevate the voices of people of color, like leading a circle by starting with the words of Adrienne Marie Brown and things she wrote in Detroit when she stayed here, and ending with Mia Mingus, and also all sorts of ways that we can, in small ways, even just elevate and lift up voices of people of color. And on that note, speaking of which, I'm going to stop talking and pass to Cheryl.
I just wanted to name, this is an area where I really feel privileged to have done a lot of writing on. Back in 2020, Colorizing Restorative Justice, Voicing Our Realities came out. And I am continuing to just be grateful to have had an opportunity to write a chapter in the book. And the book chapter is called Calling Out Whiteness. And it is about this very topic, this idea of how do we make space for people of color in, and I say in predominantly white settings, because that happens often for those of us who are people of color, especially in the Midwest. So let's talk about it. And I say that in my particular community, it is predominantly white. And I was writing about this as I'm in this community because it was my lived experience. So everything just kind of came together around that. But I talk about the idea that it's not just me that has to name this and me going to my white colleagues and saying, hey, this isn't right. Because I can tell you it's exhausting. It is asking my white colleagues, the people who are well-intentioned white folks. I'm sorry, that sounded like a bad label. For people who really do have the desire, but you got to go past your well intentions, and really the allyship is not something I'm as particularly fond of as being an accomplice, because when you are an accomplice, you are right with me, you are lockstep with me. So that's what I'm asking for. So that means when I'm not there and you see an all white space, you recognize it as a white person. That's what I'm asking people to shift the narrative to do. And so if we're not doing that in our restorative spaces, then what are we doing? Why are we doing this work? Because it's about the fact that we don't want to leave anybody out. I heard a new expression on a twist of a familiar expression, nothing for us without us. Well, the latest one is anything done without us is against us. And that's true too. And so we have to be mindful of how important, how critical it is. When we see an all white space, we should just walk out. We say, we need a do-over.
Powerful, powerful. Yes. Yep. I am going to be listening to this recording again too, to soak in, integrate all the wisdom and the calls for those of us who are white to step up, and how do we make space? Here's some great calls. I love all of the calls that we've received on this webinar. We have so many more questions that we were going to ask about how to make space in different areas, how to make space in the carceral system, how to make space in our RJ deserts, how to make space across the political divide. And I'm looking at our time, and not surprisingly, we are running out of time. And we wanted to make sure that we did create space. Speaking of making space, how do we make space for our participants who have questions? So wanted to give a little bit of time to answer questions from the Q&A feature. And I haven't had a chance while moderating, trying to listen to all of you so deeply at this rich wisdom and calls, and I'm feeling like compelled to take action in certain ways. So I haven't had a chance to look in the chat, but I am looking here now, and there was one that I think I saw that I could answer, and I'm wondering if anybody else would like to answer any questions in the chat. If there's anybody now who would like to do so, you can come off mute, and if not, then I have one that I think I could answer. All right, I'm going to go for it since I'm not seeing anybody coming off mute right away. I'm looking at a question from Liz G. What's the best efficient way to involve specialists/professionals from the criminal justice sector into nonprofit programs or restorative justice initiatives? For context and insight into that sector and processes to create in-school programming. It's tough creating programs without someone with justice backgrounds. So I'm probably, if I sit with this question more, I could think of a lot more things to share. But what came up right away is something that the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network has been focusing on is connecting with, for example, if we don't know if we have friendly folks in the court system, if their prosecutors or judges may not be friendly, we have already started connecting with the social workers, right? And social workers can cross multiple sectors. So we know that the social workers are intersecting with the criminal justice program. So we're training social workers, we're having conversations with social workers, having conversations with those who are intersecting or working within the criminal justice system that may not be thought of as, the first people that we think in mind might be the judges or the attorneys and the prosecutors. So that's the first thing that I'm thinking of, and I would like to pass it over to Elena.
I think it's so important for us to make off-ramps from those systems that especially are not helpful, that are not restorative, and that also provide like a negative return on our investment. And I think that it's important for community organizations to grab the reins and make sure that we're not just relying upon a cool prosecutor, whatever that is, or what I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like everybody's looking for something that works. And so we've been really looking at how do we create the off ramps, because our charge is to build the infrastructure to decarceration. That's what we have to do. And so in order to do that, we need to lean into the community to make that happen. We have to include the people who are most affected are the people that have the answers. I know we've just said that with the quotes that Cheryl shared. I just think it's so important to not have a crisis of creativity about how we are to dismantle things that do not serve our communities and in fact are really that are just a horrible, especially in poor communities of color. So I think it's really super important for us to go into the communities that are most affected to come with the ideas. And one of the things I'll just throw out an example. One of the things that we looked at in Chicago in 2011, there were about 2,000 young people every day, on average every day, that were in the juvenile system. And we know that the most surefire way to get into the adult system is to even spend a day in the juvenile system, right? And so we started creating the restorative justice hubs, rjhubs.org. You'll see it in the stuff that you see, and really working with a number of organizations to provide diversion and and also to show up at the police stations and say, hey, we're the community and we would like you to do a station adjustment because we don't want this young person to go through this. Or, hey, I witnessed this arrest and it was bogus and we think you should do a station adjustment. Those are the types of things that the community is doing to try to completely get people out. At this point in 2024, the average number of young people on a daily basis has gone from over 2,000 to under 200. And so that's been a big win. And who has done it? The communities.
I just would like to add something to that really quickly is I've found that legal players are actually really receptive too. So at the university, we've put mentors in detention centers that are using restorative approaches, and detention centers are totally open to this. Prosecutors are pretty open to diversion opportunities. Probation offices have been open to reentry policies. And so I think that providing these off ramps is really an awesome approach that helps everybody, right? They're more effective, and they're definitely better for the people served. So awesome.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to bring us to a close since we're out of time. Unfortunately, we knew that we would be, want to be here all day talking. I'm sure there's so much more wisdom that can be teased out. However, we are running out of time. So I'm going to ask one final closing question for everyone to briefly share. We have only just like 5 minutes. So if you can briefly share one sentence, each of our panelists, what's one final tip or piece of wisdom or message of hope or inspiration you'd like to leave us with? So one sentence, tip or piece of wisdom or message of hope or inspiration. We'll go in the same order we began with. So I'll start with you, Tito.
Yes, I would say meet people where they are. I will pass.
I'll just repeat what I had said, which is go boldly and get out of the way.
Thank you, Elle. Cheryl?
I think about those of us who have that practitioner background. I think everyone should have a prison home. We should all have facilities that we are connected to so that we do not forget how we come to this work and whom we serve in the ways that can benefit, and it works both ways.
For me, and it's a little bit related to the work we're doing right now, is going upstream. So how can we use restorative practices to go upstream so people, especially youth, but for everybody, do not become justice involved.
My parting hope for all the people watching are that they get all of the resources that are sent out, because each person in each of these boxes has so many cool things going on, and we have sent our linkages so that you will all get them, because this was too short to include everything, but I'm so happy that people have participated today.
Are that things really are changing. Been working in this area for about 25 years, and it's different than it was. And so I think we should have hope that we have building momentum and our systems are changing just slowly.
My hope is that we who are on this call will be restorative in our own selves, and whatever the micro, meso, or macro communities in which we find ourselves, and that we connect to the roots of this work, and the indigenous folks, the native folks, the practitioners and the accomplices, that we actually embody what it means to be a full human being who's trying to be in community with others on the planet.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Pass it over to you, Avery, to close us out.
Yes, I echo what we don't have enough time. We're out of time. We need another hour. Goodness gracious. Thank you all again for your wisdom and your knowledge. I'm sure folks who were on the call, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions. But like I said, we will definitely provide resources, links to a lot of what folks were talking about in terms of resources and information to get that over to you. As well as I saw some questions earlier regarding where can I find more information about the work that's happening in Nebraska? I will share out a newly launched restorative justice laws database that the National Center collaborated on. So I'll get that information. And then I would be remiss if we didn't talk about what's happening, how we're rounding out the year. So one more plug, we are rounding out with RJ in the West next month at the end of the month. So October 30th, we'll have panelists talking about restorative justice work in the West, on the West Coast. November 1st, we will have restorative justice and neurodiversity / mental health in the criminal legal system. That's going to be a good one. That's on November 1st. And we have a twofer in November. And then we'll round out the month on November 20th with RJ and policy, because, you know, every year is an election year, but this one is an election year. And it's good to talk about policy, and that also coincides with the laws database as well. And then also just check out our website again at ncorj.org to just view some past recordings, and this one will also be uploaded. Thank you all again. Please don't forget to fill out the feedback that will be available as soon as you click out of this webinar. We really prioritize your feedback. We really do read the section where we're like, what kind of topics do you want to hear? Like, keep those topics and suggestions coming, because they are very helpful to craft the next series. So thank you again. Thank you to all of our panelists, and we will see you next time.